So this is kind of an interlude video. I stopped editing my video when I was in psychosis 2.5 years ago. Partly because it was pretty intense, and partly because I had to go do something, and so I wanted to save it and upload it before that got lost, because it takes a while to put all those bits of text in there. And then I did that, so then I'll just do a whole new video for part 2 instead of making it one long video. And there's definitely an intensity to watching it and putting in my comments about where I was at inside, and it can't really contain all of where I was at inside, partly because I can't remember, because the remembering is that complete intensity and I'm not there, and partly I don't remember what I was saying in the last sentence, so there's this intensity of watching it and adding that commentary and sort of going back there to where I was in consciousness, and it's kind of scary. And it's partly scary because some of the things I talk about, the fear of death, are still with me. And part of it is that I'm creating this self-dialogue with myself, and sometimes I feel like I'm creating it in order to have the right to die. So create something, and then something's going to happen to me and I'm going to die for real. And I haven't been able to die yet because I haven't really created that thing that I was meant to create. And I don't know if this dialogue with myself is that, and then I'm meant to die, or if I really will get to live my life out and live out the 25 years and then live out my last 25 years and die at 85 and beyond. And what does that matter anyways? So what I'm trying to say is that watching it is resonating with some of my fears, and I actually did scare myself a little bit watching it, and I can't remember what part it was and what thought entered my mind, but sometimes when that scare myself thing happens, that's when I go downhill. That's what happened in January, that's what happened in February or early March when I got to California, and after a month I had a bit of a scaring myself, and then a week later I went into a crisis. So the scaring myself isn't as scary as feeling like it could lead to crisis. So I have to be wary. And also remembering that that video I made 3 weeks after coming off my medications 2.5 years ago, and I'm only about 10 days off my meds right now, so I haven't even passed that 3-week mark. So even if I get to 3 weeks, that's a success. And Hardy Nutritionals told me to take more vitamin C if I need it, if I feel those scary sensations. And so yeah, there's that 3-week marker and so many different things coming in. And also there's just the intensity of feeling more energy and aliveness from being off the meds. And it seems this intensity is being mirrored in my reality. Me wanting to finish talking about the mental illness stuff and move on with it by putting this psychosis video in there and putting commentary, and this is sort of the last day of really dealing with the harsh mental illness stuff, and then there's some kind of fun mental illness stuff, and then moving on to the next thing. But it's intense doing that and thinking back on that, and it's intense being off the meds. And then in reality, yesterday I met this really intense guy. I won't call him a man because he's not an older man, he's maybe the same age as I am, or maybe a little older or a bit younger, and he's very intense. And I may have talked to myself about this quality of speaking as, and most people go around in life speaking about things, speaking about memories, speaking about people, and everything's about, and that's where jealousy and envy and comparison and all this stuff come in, because we're thinking about something. We're not actually in contact with life and speaking as life, speaking as the moment. So I've talked a lot about this, and that's kind of what I feel is the intensity that wants to connect with this being. And I have no idea if that's true, but there is an intensity in that energy of mania, which to me is the energy of life itself. And I'd like to start speaking about it in those terms and go back to where I was before I was ever labeled. So it's interesting timing that I'm getting rid of this intense mental illness stuff and feeling intense because I'm off medication, and then meeting this intense person who seems to really embody speaking as life And it was really fascinating to watch today, him sort of speaking as life and cutting to the chase and really not, I don't know, it's just some quality, and it was very intense in the experience. So it was an intense experience today, and it was something that I sort of looked at as I made an attempt to do that at some point a number of months ago, and it was sort of met with this disbelieving energy. And maybe part of the reason why I allow that disbelief energy to warp my experience and just move me towards being quiet, at least in daily life, about speaking as this life energy, and wanting to move towards speaking as that and not speaking as this life energy translated through, oh, I was diagnosed with a mental illness. So that's the part that I want to leave behind. And by not taking the meds, it's easier to leave that behind and just speak as that and see what happens. But he's really able to do that and embody that. And I'm not sure if through my form I will be able to do that, or if I even want to, or if I even have it in me to do that. And I think that's part of what is the trouble with so-called mania, is one goes into this intensity, is speaking as life and really living life, but it gets shot down and warped. So there's no transparency to it. There's still maybe some ego energy behind it, and then that warps it into so-called psychosis and things like that. And I've talked about that in different ways at length, I'm sure. So all of that, adding the caveat of, oh, but this related to mental illness and that related to mental illness, and translating that life energy into something about mental illness, is something that I want to leave behind. And I don't know if I'll be able to. Maybe I'll only last off these meds 2 more weeks, and that'll be the end of the story regarding that. But it could also be that that energy comes in and there's some intense things that I need to go through internally. And can I be with that energy without labeling it and thinking about it in terms of a mental illness, but contain it with this non-locality of consciousness and non-linearity of consciousness, and allow the energy to move through and be done with in a way. And it seems like this guy is someone who was able to do that. I don't know his story. And to me, it's just sort of fascinating to observe and really see how he's able to embody this energy. And maybe by not being on the meds, I'll be able to embody it more, and or just observe it more in other people and to move towards that and learn that way. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I'm just finding it interesting that this intensity is being met with this intense person, and not that, and that could allow me to observe something to find within myself, because I had an insight that life doesn't give up. And when I was being vocal at the time and just sort of speaking as life, I felt it got warped again into, I don't have a place to speak like that, or it's not believed, or it's not met with some kind of sharing in that. It's just sort of shot down. And today I had the experience of people who were able to share in that energy of what he was speaking as, were really just there and just really there and just looking and observing and just watching him and different things. And people that were not able to meet that were sort of put off by not having a turn to speak, or put off by the tension in the room that other people wanted to share things, or I don't know, different things. And it seemed almost like this tension of not being able to meet that more than anything. So when somebody's able to speak as that, there can be tension that some people are not able to meet that, which makes sense that most people aren't. But in my case, I feel like I kind of give up, and maybe I do give up, and I don't want to speak as that with the intention that anyone should ever be able to understand where I'm coming from. And that's the thing with so-called mania and so-called bipolar. People of lower intensity just aren't able to understand where that's coming from, or where that energy is coming from, or what the person's speaking as, or what they're all about. And then they just medicate them. Whereas from my perspective, I've been sitting in different conversations and not saying a word for months and thinking, how are people even coming up with this? Like, oh, I felt jealous about this and compare that. Like, it's just such irrelevant stuff. And I'm like, where is this even coming from? I can't even follow this. I have nothing to say in response. So it's sort of the opposite of not being able to meet that. So just being quiet. Whereas one can speak as life and not be quiet, and then most people aren't really going to be able to meet that. But does life give up? And does that life energy give up? And I think that's part of how these waves of energy that are usually labeled mania keeps coming back, because life doesn't give up. Life doesn't give up in meeting a being and moving that being according to that life energy, which has nothing to do with and has no appearance like how we appear when we're operating based on programs of thought and talking about our past memories and bringing up all these associations and not really meeting the moment, but keeping ourselves separate from the moment by always interjecting the me. So I made a bunch of notes during the conversation, which I haven't done in a long time, and I could really see what was being said, which hasn't happened in a long time. So there's something happening energetically, and it's kind of interesting. And I also wonder about editing this video. Should I be watching this now? Should I be watching this video now? Could it resonate with things and be troublesome? But I think I have to face that. And I only have one more 15-minute or so clip to watch of me in that state. And seeing myself in that state, I really did feel like a homeless person with no family. Though understanding that I do have a family in this body, but Krishnamurti talks about how we are the world. I am the world and the world is me, he says. And I feel like in that state of so-called psychosis, we're really experiencing that we are the world. The fact that we have a body that keeps us sort of mostly connected to this one consistent consciousness of our ego experience, our body sort of ensures that through the situations that we move through life, we recognize them and then we associate and we feel like our ego, me, self. But in that state, that altered state, all of that disappears and we realize that consciousness can move and we're all one consciousness. So usually I have my ego consciousness, but when that dissolves, I could experience the consciousness of a being that is homeless on the street, because we are one consciousness. And the point of experiencing that is to really sense for real that we're one consciousness. And if we did sense for real that we're one consciousness, how would we act? Would we even be able to walk by the homeless person on the street if we knew that the one we were walking by is also the one who walks by? And the one who walks by is also the one we're walking by. It's all one. And it's not guaranteed that we always experience our limited ego consciousness because it's not fundamental. So we take it to be fundamental and then we wonder, oh, look at these anomalies in this disease and this disorder and this and this and this, but we don't question that that self is not fundamental. A unity consciousness is fundamental. And it doesn't mean that we have bodies that are attached to each other. No, we have separate bodies, but when we have the unity consciousness, we look at something and we can feel it as if it were us. So that's making the exact calculation of feeling the moment exactly as it is, not translated in terms of our past memories and just having that going along in our head while we're walking through reality. No, it's as we walk moment to moment, we're in touch with that moment to moment, and if we were in touch, we would act completely differently. When we have this monologue going on, we can walk by the homeless person. When we're in touch with the moment, we may or may not walk by, but we'll definitely feel that, what it feels like. So I feel like those states of consciousness, when they come in, part of the design of it, not all of it, is to re-equilibrate our mirror system of being able to be in touch with the moment. And it's actually the opposite. If I'm feeling like I'm a homeless person, yet I'm in my living room, I'm definitely not in touch with the moment. But since I've missed being in touch with so many moments, it's getting me in touch with the whole accumulation of that, and not just through my life, but through all of human history. And it's making me feel that so strongly that if I get through it, I will act differently because I know the fundamental unity. And that's part of the gift of it. But then when we say, oh my gosh, it's my mental illness and I have this problem. No, it's a humanity problem. It's all of humanity. And that state gets us in touch with that. And then we're able to be different. But by being medicated, we're not able to be different because we lose that intensity, and that intensity is dampened by the chemicals, and that energy isn't able to come through us in the same way. We lose our perception moment to moment. But the process itself of seeing all of that human history and feeling it and trying to have that recalibrated in our nervous system to have that sensitivity moving forward in life is still limited. It's not the moment. It's still playing catch up. And then if we can transcend through that and allow that to mutate our brain in ways to be sensitive to the moment, then we will live out our moments differently and not pile up the same accumulations, because nothing's accumulating. Things accumulate if I'm in my head and walking by things that I should be noticing because of having a human brain and human nervous system. So it's not acting, it's reenacting old things and not acting in the moment. So I'm not actually in the moment. So I'm accumulating all those moments that I missed, and then that's at some point going to catch up to me. And I don't think it's like a punitive thing. It's just the law of the nervous system. So point being, if we're all one, how would we be? We don't sense that oneness, so we don't act in that way. So in mania, we don't walk by anything. We walk with it. We walk as it. We walk in it. We are it, and we feel that. And it's just a change in perspective of how we move through life. And instead of moving through life and accumulating this weight of allostatic load that accumulates because we're not seeing in the moment, but actually living in our allostatic load of the past, eventually there's a mechanism that seems to bring that whole allostatic load into consciousness for processing, and it's extremely painful. Even just one little thought can be very painful from the past, but imagine all of them and the power of that being brought to an experience of hours or days or weeks, and it's a lot. So yeah, I kind of scared myself, and it makes sense because I'm looking at scary energies, and some of it seems a little bit like premonition, and I am afraid, and I feel like the ego is afraid to die. And part of this is getting to a place to allow the ego to feel safe in dying instead of afraid of it, because when the ego's afraid of dying, it feels like the body's going to die, and that sort of adds a spiral effect of acting out ending one's life, or feeling like one needs support, which is usually met with, well, if you feel like you're going to end your life, well, you got to be medicated or something. And I talked about how witnessing and not warping the experience that one is going through with one's thoughts, like, oh, I think this person's crazy, is important. And that warps a person into maybe being a part of the mental health system. So I'm seeing now that even witnessing myself, can I just look at it completely impartially, even though it's me there and it sort of brings up certain things? Can I just be impartial and impartially write down what I was experiencing in that moment, and then move through the experience of editing it in this way and kind of let it go? And maybe something of that magnitude, maybe something completely different, but of a high intensity, is going to come upon this being, and can I forget all that and begin anew and just be with that energy without labeling it, and not be with that energy, be that energy, and not separate myself from it and be afraid of it. So this is me witnessing someone witnessing me. It's kind of interesting. And this impartial witnessing is love, and love initiates this healing mechanism, and often that love comes from another person. And I had this insight that everything is love, even if it's really, really ugly, and the ego interprets it as not, from the most horrific things. And that was an insight that kind of scared me, because I hope that it doesn't happen to this being, and not for this being's sake, but for those who might have to translate what happened after the fact. And I don't know, it's kind of weird. I'm not sure what I'm talking about, but when I watch myself in that really non-linear state, sometimes my brain can sort of extrapolate to possible things in the future because it's so non-linear. It can kind of see the future, and sometimes I feel the body gets scared because partly to lower the consciousness and bring it back to not being so non-linear, because that can be dangerous. So consciousness has a sense of that. And the other thing is, I don't remember, and I was thinking about, it's possible that we have trouble sleeping in those states because there's so much dream element to it, and image, and this other realm that isn't of the material, that when that process is going on, the brain actually thinks it's sleeping, because that's often what happens in sleep, is we dream. So if the brain is kind of dreaming awake, it thinks it's asleep and won't go to sleep. And I came to that when I was talking about how if we watch someone scratching their head and our brain can't tell the difference between us scratching our head and watching it or imagining it, well, it could be similar in the mechanism of dreaming, that if we have all this dream and collective unconscious stuff in our waking experience, the brain thinks it's sleeping and won't go to sleep. But then there could also be something to it that we are kind of sleeping, because the regular state of consciousness is partially sleepwalking, and that's what I mean, how it's lost in the habitual thoughts and moving in a mechanical and habitual way, and not actually moving in accordance with the moment. So when that goes on for a certain period of time and there's enough stress built up, then all that stuff that we missed sort of comes into consciousness and is a function to wake us up, because we've been moving around in this habitual mode too long. So I feel like it's kind of a mechanism of waking people up by showing it is all one, it's unity, all that stuff I said, plus everything that I've said before. And so in a way, the point is to be awake and wake up. So one of the antidotes or opposites or balancing elements of psychosis is just to be really awake in daily life and be with each moment, which is a state of meditation, which is not what we think about when we think about the word meditation, which is sitting and staring at a wall and not saying anything and focusing. This is the opposite. It's being active, being alive, being with every moment, and not focusing, but allowing the moment to be with us and be us and speak through us. And then we don't accumulate, and we don't need this waking mechanism, like a bad dream, to really wake us up from the bad dream of the reality we've all co-created together. So I don't know if I'll continue to speak in terms of some of these elements that are labeled mental illness that might not be mental illness at all, but the way the psyche sort of awakens and detaches itself from the being in order for the being to fully be alive and have life flowing through it instead of just the psyche flowing through it. So I don't know, maybe it's good to talk about that. I don't know if I will reframe it in that way. Maybe I will more, because that would be a good way to have some context in case that does happen again to me, where this extreme process is ignited. So it could be good that I'm revisiting that and looking at it and witnessing it as impartially as I can, and being a witness to myself and dropping that interpretation in order to create new context around that, which I've probably done a lot throughout this, but maybe concentrate more on that in light of all of that being more of a possibility and not wanting to get funneled back to the mental health system. So it's tricky, because looking at it could be inviting that energy and sort of resonating with it to bring it about, but it could also be helpful in witnessing it impartially and also keeping in mind to create new context around that in order to keep myself safe if that does happen. So being awake is the remedy. If we're awake while awake, then the brain won't dream while it's awake. But since it's partly asleep, it's easy for these dream elements to come in to try and wake us up. And that makes a lot of sense to me, and of course it's not the only thing. I'm sure it could be talked about in a zillion different ways, and the point is not about having the right idea about it or context. It's about creating one's own context to contain the experience if it does come back moving forward. And possibly one day that won't even be necessary, because we can just move so fluidly that these old associations don't come in at all, so it becomes irrelevant. But in today's day and age, when fearful things and energies come in, it's so easy to quickly refer back to the million stories and movies and all the things that we've seen to make sense of that. So making sense of it in a different way, preemptively, to build a bridge to a different way of being by not translating that way of being into some kind of pathology and then living out a pathologized life. So I hope that makes some kind of sense. I probably talk a bit fast, but I just talk at the speed that it comes through me. And I just wonder if I can be that love, not give love, but just be that love and not worry about how it is given. And the guy today was asked what this thing about him going before he talked was, and he answered so beautifully. He said, "It's the most beautiful thing in the world." And when he said that, I really had a sense of his in touchness with what it was he was seeing and saying and speaking as life itself, and in relationship with life itself, not separating himself from life with words. And I really sense that that is what is wanting to connect to me and has attempted to before in the past, but it gets translated and moved into a paradigm that then is really difficult to get out of. So I saw something there, and I'm not really sure what it is, but yeah, it was really something. So this all feels really intense, and can I move with this intensity without judging it? And a little instance of that happened today. I won't really explain the details, but it was just an example of how sometimes it feels like that intensity comes in and it gets sabotaged in some way by the ego speaking to bring the ego back in, and then the ego judges what happened, and then that lowers the level of consciousness and lowers it and lowers it. So there's also this mechanism that prevents that intensity from getting too high, but the mechanism is usually destructive. It's not like, okay, now I'm going to back off the intensity, you can just go for a nice walk, which happens too, but when it gets so intense, sometimes the ego will actually say something and it's a bit hurtful to somebody else, and then one's like, wow, that intensity just led to saying something hurtful. And so it's questioning the intensity, it's questioning the energy, and then it's bringing in the ego and then adding in the judge, which reinforces the ego. So it's this downward spiral mechanism that is probably the mechanism that leads from mania to psychosis. And it's like this journey back to the consensus level of consciousness, which, if happens through psychosis, is medicalized and pathologized and usually leads to a lifelong living out of a mental illness. But if it can really be watched and see that mechanism that does that, one can maybe learn to bring down the intensity without getting too high, and then having that high energy self-destruct itself in the spirit of wanting to be able to meet people at the level they're at. It sounds really weird, and it almost is like a justification for bad behavior, but I saw this mechanism happen and what it was trying to do. And I think seeing the mechanism, it just transparently operating, it can be caught, and then that spiral might not happen, and one can just move without bringing the intensity down, or bring it down because the mechanism can't act once it's caught enough times. I don't know if that makes any sense, and I don't know if there's anything else I want to say before doing the next part of the video, but I will leave it at that for now, and I can always go back to it after. And after this, I'm definitely going to go into some positive stuff just to balance that negative energy, and and then go into this other video I did, which is sort of the opposite of this video of psychosis. I call it the fly whisperer, and I won't go into it now, but that's the plan. So just after I finished that clip, I had the thought enter that is kind of a scary thought, that the energy might end this being's existence because people can't handle the truth. And they can't handle the truth that we're one consciousness. And mania and psychosis show us that we're one consciousness. But then we sort of get saved by the mental health system drugging us back to feeling like we're not one consciousness. But the opposite is other people realizing that we are one consciousness and acting differently because of that felt realization, not just verbally. So I feel like if a situation is created where I end my life, it'll be created because society wants to just continue to interpret all of this as just a meaningless mental illness, and my ending my own life would actually kind of be confirmation of that. So the world wants a good show, and that's what will happen. It will create a show of some kind, and just being okay with that instead of being afraid of that. And I'm just speaking from the intensity that I feel, but it's hopefully something that will just pass and I can just go on connecting with love. But the insight I had was everything's love. So even if I kill myself, apparently that is love. And those are some of the sensations I'm having now while in this intense state, and looking at that video, which maybe I shouldn't continue to look at, but I'm just going to do it anyway and see what happens next. And maybe just being with the intensity of the possibility of death by my own hand is something that I just need to be with, because I might be the only one who really watches that show happen. And then the thought enters my mind, oh, unless you put that on video too, haha. So it's really twisted, and I hope that doesn't happen. But I guess I've been talking about that possibility, and it's not the possibility that I want. I want the possibility of having the 25 years that are amazing, plus 25 years, and living a good life. And I hope, if it's not possible for me, that it's made possible for more people. So yeah, I really hope I can just get this video done and move on from this dreadful-ish stuff and go on to the next thing. So it's just interesting that some of those energies that were there with me when I made that video, when my friend videoed me 2.5 years ago, are here right now while I'm in the place of looking at it. And I don't know if it's the looking at it or if the place I'm in is leading me to look at it. So then it's just all one thing. It's whatever it is inescapable. That's the truth.